Imagine standing on a freezing Chicago street in 1930. You're wearing your best coat, your hat is pulled low, and you're standing in a line that seems to stretch forever. You aren't waiting for a train. You aren't waiting for a job interview. You're waiting for food. And the hardest part isn't the hunger. It's the possibility that someone you know might see you. Because yesterday, you were a working man. Today, you're standing in a bread line. This was Chicago during the Great Depression, a city where thousands of ordinary people found themselves facing a question they had never imagined asking: where will my family's next meal come from? Look closely at the men standing in these photographs. Many are wearing suits, collared shirts, wool coats, hats pulled tightly over their heads. At first it might seem strange. Why dress so formally when you have nothing? But these clothes represented something more than fashion. They represented dignity. For generations, a man's worth was often tied to his ability to provide. He worked. He brought home a paycheck. He fed his family. But the Depression changed everything. Factories closed, businesses failed, jobs disappeared. And suddenly, men who had spent their entire lives working were standing in lines waiting for a free meal. Some survivors later described the humiliation of being seen there. Imagine walking several blocks out of your way because you know someone you used to work with might be standing in the same line. Imagine lowering your head, pulling your hat down, hoping nobody recognizes you. You aren't ashamed because you did something wrong. You're ashamed because you need help. And that was the painful reality of the breadline. Chicago was hit especially hard by the Depression. This was an industrial city. Factories, railroads, stockyards, manufacturing. Millions of lives depended on the jobs these industries provided. But when the economy collapsed, the work disappeared. By the early 1930s, unemployment had reached devastating levels. A man could leave home in the morning searching for work and return that evening with nothing, no paycheck, no job, sometimes not even a promise of one. And behind every unemployed worker was a family, a wife wondering how to pay the rent, children waiting for dinner, a kitchen with less food than yesterday. The breadline wasn't just a line of hungry men. It was the visible face of a much larger crisis. And then there was Al Capone, Chicago's most notorious gangster, a man whose name was associated with organized crime, bootlegging, violence, and corruption. But in November 1930, a soup kitchen opened at 935 South State Street. It was financed by Capone, and it served free food to the unemployed: soup, coffee, donuts. For hungry Chicagoans, the food was real, and the need was real. But there was something deeply ironic about the entire situation. One of America's most notorious criminals was now being seen handing out meals to people who desperately needed them. The soup kitchen also generated enormous publicity for Capone. His charitable image grew at a time when his criminal empire was under increasing scrutiny. So the story wasn't simple. Capone wasn't suddenly a hero, but for the people standing in line, hunger didn't care about politics. They needed food, and that soup kitchen provided it. It became one of the strangest symbols of Depression-era Chicago, a gangster feeding the hungry, while the city struggled to cope with the crisis. So when you look at an old photograph of a Depression-era breadline, don't just see a crowd of hungry people. Look closer. See the man in the worn suit, the father thinking about his children, the worker who wants nothing more than a job, the person who once had everything they needed, and now needs someone else to help them survive. The breadline on State Street became a symbol of one of the darkest moments in American history. But the people who stood in those lines did not remain there forever. They survived, they rebuilt, they raised families, and they moved forward. Just as the World's Fair promised, tomorrow eventually came. But for the people standing in that line, they had to survive today first.